So calorie-focused thinking to weight loss can actually be more harmful than helpful. Number one, the idea of a calorie is actually flawed. Basically, our human biological system is not a bomb calorimeter, and the idea of calories itself is flawed. Number two, if someone is just focusing on calories, then they may select a lower calorie food compared to a higher calorie food, which can actually have the opposite effect on weight gain, because typically a lower calorie food is not going to provide as much satiety, whereas a higher calorie food is typically more of a whole food that will provide more satiety and fullness throughout the day, which will lead to weight loss. So we need to be focusing on things like what foods keep me full for a longer period of time rather than just the caloric content of foods, which again, the caloric content of foods is highly flawed. So this is the second point. You are then setting up someone for trying to calculate calories, which is highly flawed in and of itself. For example, the thermic effect of different macronutrients are completely different. So if you have 100 calories of fat, 100 calories of carbs, and 100 calories of protein, the amount that you're actually going to absorb is completely different. The thermic effect of protein is about 30%. So essentially 100 calories from protein is really only like 70 calories. But for carbohydrates, the thermic effect is only 10%. So if you're looking at the 100 calories coming from carbohydrates, well, essentially 90% of those you can say are effective, or basically are going to, let's say, come into the body. Whereas with protein, it's only 70 calories of that 100. So you're setting someone up then to try and make these difficult calculations because when you see calories basically on a label, you actually should be adjusting based on the thermic effect. So protein has the highest thermic effect of 30%. So really 100 calories from protein is really like only 70. So that is the other second basically inherent problem to calorie-focused thinking. Even the oxidation rates of fat, different fats are different. Basically, long-chain saturated fats that are high in things like dairy, which is not to say that dairy is bad, have a lower oxidation rate compared to medium-chain fats or polyunsaturated fats. In other words, even how readily you burn different types of fats are completely different. So again, you are more likely to store long-chain saturated fats than burn them compared to, let's say, oleic acid, which is in olive oil, or the monounsaturated fats that are in like avocados, and the polyunsaturated fats as well. So again, not to say that those foods are bad that are higher in long-chain saturated fats compared to monounsaturated fats. All I'm saying is literally the oxidation rates of those different fats are different. In other words, some get burned more readily, some get stored, are more likely to be stored as fat. So calorie-focused thinking does not take into account the satiety effects of food, the thermic effect, the oxidation rates of different foods. And then there's two other things that we need to think about. Nutrient density and how different foods will affect your hormones. So calorie-focused thinking, if you're going to be selecting more lower calorie foods, those are typically higher in simple sugars. So consuming a diet higher in simple sugars will increase glucose and increase insulin, which can lead to chronic elevations in insulin, which can lead to more fat stored per calorie consumed. In other words, the types of foods that you select can have different effects on insulin, which will have a different effect on whether you're going to be storing more fat or you're going to be burning more fat. So calorie-focused thinking, again, does not take into account basically how foods affect your hormones and also even thyroid hormone. So if you are consuming different foods and they are hurting your thyroid hormone and you have a lower thyroid hormone, you are going to store more fat per calorie consumed. So it's not just about calories, it's also about how foods affect your hormones. And so even improving the effects of hormones without even lowering calorie intake can lead to weight loss. So you do not necessarily have to be in a quote unquote calorie deficit to lose fat. if you improve someone's insulin sensitivity or you improve their thyroid hormone function. So it really depends on the baseline of the person as well, if you even have to go into a quote unquote calorie deficit, which is an inaccurate term to even begin with to say, but that's what most people typically say, so we'll just say that here. That doesn't even necessarily always happen as well. The other factor too is nutrient density. Different foods bring different micronutrients, minerals, and vitamins. Numerous deficiencies in either single vitamins or single minerals can lead to insulin resistance and elevated insulin, and again, then storing more fat per calorie consumed. So if you are B1, which is thiamine deficient, that has been shown to lead to diabetic glucose curves and increased insulin levels, and hence more fat stored per calorie consumed. And guess what? That also happens with low magnesium. The same thing will happen. Low manganese, the same thing can happen. Low copper, the same thing can happen. Even low vitamin C can increase insulin levels and insulin resistance. So how much nutrients you get from a food will also determine how much fat is stored per calorie consumed.